Hi, my name's Chris, and welcome to the Chaotic Good Story Club. First up, I want to address the fact that I intended to start doing these months ago, but the pandemic and dubious mental health kind of got in my way about that. So I've decided to stop getting anxious about making everything perfect and having the best transitions and the best sound and everything like that. And I'm just going to start uh, knocking these out every sort of Thursday or Friday when I have time, and we'll see how it goes and if I manage to get better at doing all of this. Um, I'll discuss more of my future plans towards the end of the video, but I want to kick into the main content, which is an idea for kicking off the channel that originally came to me back in August after the Hugo Awards, when there was a bit of a stushy. Uh, Alternative Scots words including kerfuffle and rammy and stramash are also available. But there was a commotion around the hosts of the Hugo Awards, mostly old white dudes who got their breaks in the 70s and 80s, who didn't seem all that interested or knowledgeable about the more diverse younger authors who were actually winning awards at the time. And they were more enthusiastic about the golden age of science fiction, um, which is long past, and we're in a new golden age now. And a lot of people were annoyed by that, and it struck me as pretty sucky as well. And it ties into a lot of the idea that I grew up with, that there's a right way to enjoy genre fiction, and there's this August canon that you have to be interested in, that you have to be knowledgeable about to be a real fan. And fuck that. I don't believe in gatekeeping. I've bought into that mindset before, and it's pathetic. You know, we're all fans, and no matter your path to being interested in speculative fiction, no matter your influences, you're a fan, and that's great. Now, by all means, everyone should recommend. I think this story is really cool. You should read that. Or I think you'll like this based on other things that you like. That's great. That's being a fan. That's being a mate. But saying, "Oh, you've not read this story or that story, you're not a real fan." Fuck that noise. Fuck that noise. Um, we all have our own path. There's always some weird idiosyncratic story of something that you saw or read that makes you go, hell yeah, I like that, and it leads you to other stuff. But for anybody to ever tell anybody else that they're not a real fan because they don't like Heinlein, or they haven't read Dune, or they can't batter out a 10,000 word thesis on why Gormenghast is superior to Lord of the Rings off the top of my head. It's just mince. We all have our personal canon, and that's something to be really excited about because you speak to other people who are fans, and their canon is different. And usually, in the grey areas between, that's where you can relate to each other. So, having thoroughly lambasted old white guys holding forth about their personal canon, I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal canon and how I became the sci fi uh, fantasy horror fan that I am now. Um, so as a kid, I started off reading children's books and being read children's books. So a lot of the language in things like Rudyard Kipling and the Jungle Book and the Just So stories means a lot to me. I acknowledge it's now kind of problematic. Peter Pan was a huge story for me. C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia were huge for me. Again, some problematic stuff in there. And a lot of the language and the fantasy and the way that came about was huge. I moved on to reading Commando comics and Dan Dare and Eagle annuals that I picked up at church bringing buy sales. Um, I was given books about Norse and Greek mythology, which I adored. In later years, I started getting into the Games Workshop games and moving into Grimdark through things like that. I started picking up fantasy in my local library, and that introduced me to people like David Eddings and Anne McCaffrey. Through friends, I was introduced to Ian M. Banks and Clive Barker, Terry Pratchett, Neil Gaiman, Anne Rice, Julian May. I moved on to start reading Tolkien just when the films came out in the early 2000s, because I kind of bounced off it when I was 13 or so. I tried a few things when I was 13 or so. Like, I remember trying to read Foundation by Isaac Asimov, and I intend to go back to that. And I bounced off it pretty hard. Through comics, I moved into things like Preacher and Transmetropolitan. Again, issues nowadays. And yeah, that was how I came into things. And then obviously there's your big pop culture franchises. There's the Crow and the Avengers and Batman. You can't avoid this stuff, and all of that's important to me in different ways. To say go back when I was just a almost just a preteen and getting into Games Workshop and stuff like that, which is arguably too young to be getting into Grimdark. I remember reading friends of my mum's sons who were older than me had 2000 AD, and I remember loving Nemesis the Warlock and stuff when I was like 12 and 13. Probably not the best parenting there, but hey, I remember I my fandom stultified for a while, but I didn't read as much for a few years, or spent a lot of time catching up and rereading old things. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, I came back to genre and realised that everything had moved on so much for me. And in the time since, I've discovered people like Becky Chambers, Enki Jemisin, Anne Leckie, and Tamsin Muir, as well as going back and rereading some of the classics. I've gone back and reread things like Dracula and Frankenstein. I've reread Dune, and I adore it, while again, it has its issues. I went back to read Robert Heinlein because I love the Starship Troopers movie, and reading things like A Stranger in a Strange Land, I bounced off that so hard. But I am going to go back and reread Foundation, especially because there's a movie coming out. It's good to be ahead of that kind of thing. So yeah, that's roughly how I got to where I am. I've missed out so much stuff, but we'll go back and we'll talk about things as we go along with this series. Of late, I just finished reading "Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race" by I forget the other Remy. I've forgotten the author's name and haven't written it down on my piece of paper. That's really bad. I've been listening to the new Deftones album, and I just finished Harrow the Ninth, again, Tamsin Muir, and at the moment I'm doing it as a bit of a palate cleanser. I'm reading the first Murderbot novella, All Systems Red, by Martha Wells, and Remy Eddo Lodge is the writer of Why I'm No Longer Talking about to White People About Race. Thankfully, I did remember that. I'm just as bad as the guys who presented the Hugo Awards. Well done, Chris. Yeah, and moving forward, I am going to try and do one of these a week. Some will be just enthusing about individual things or something I've just read. If there's any requests come in, I'm going to try and bump my writing back into gear after taking a bit of a hit during the pandemic, because having the kids at home all summer and not being able to go anywhere is not conducive to your writing. So I'm going to do NaNoWriMo, but I'm going to do a flash fiction version where I write a flash story a day, and I'm going to base them on Kat Hellison's prompts, which I will include a link to in the description. If you've enjoyed this, then please feel free to buy me a coffee or support my Patreon. Links in the description. And let me know what you'd want me to talk about in future, hopefully with less umming and ahhing and forgetting the authors' names. I've been Chris, this is the Chaotic Good Story Club, and I ask you all to take care, tell stories, and lift one another up, always. And happy Halloween.